Hello and welcome to the lesson on vertex form. Today we're going to look at writing a function rule for quadratic formulas in vertex form. Now vertex form is going to look something a little like what we see here, where it says f of x equals a times a quantity of x minus h squared plus k. From what we've looked at so far, we know that this a value here is going to tell us which direction our parabola is going to open, if it's going to be a U-shaped parabola or if it's going to be upside down. The squared tells us that it's going to be a parabola. And then today what we're going to do is we're going to look at one more thing. We're going to look at this, the h and the k together. Because the k value, if you recall, okay, k is going to tell us if we're going to shift our parabola up or down. But when I look at this h and this k value together, this is actually going to give me the vertex of my function. Okay, so I'm going to show you how we're going to use the vertex to write an equation. And we're going to do that by looking at the next couple of examples. Okay, so to start off with, it says find the equation of the parabola in vertex form. Well, the nice thing about vertex form is all I have to do is look at my graph and find my vertex. So here I can see that my vertex is the coordinate point 3, 2. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in that vertex into my equation. Remember, h and k are the coordinates, h being the x coordinate, k being the y coordinate. So I have a times a quantity of x minus 3 plus 2. So it's starting to take shape. Oops, and this is squared. But I'm not 100% done yet because I don't have my a value. Now I can tell that by looking at my graph should be it is upside down, so that my a should be a negative, but I have to figure out how to solve that. So to solve that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find one other point on my parabola. And this one right here, I'm just going to use the point 2, 1. So I'll write point 2, 1. And you can pick any point, but I'm going to plug that in for my x and y. Remember, f of x is really y equals a times a quantity of x minus 3 squared plus 2. And then I'm going to take that point of 2, 1 and plug it in for my x and my y. So my y value is 1. Equals a times the quantity of my x is 2 minus 3 squared plus 2. If I subtract 2 from both sides, I get negative 1 equals a times a negative 1 squared. Well, a negative 1 squared is going to give me a positive 1, so I really end up with a value of a equals negative 1. So if I rewrite my equation, what I'm left with then is f of x equals a, which is a negative, or you could write the negative 1 in there, times a quantity of x minus 3 squared plus 2. And this here is the equation for the graph that you can see pictured here. Now for example 2, it says find the equation of the parabola in vertex form. Well, again, vertex form is f of x equals a times a quantity of x minus h squared plus k. Here, I can see that my vertex is at the coordinate point. So I'm going to write vertex is at 1, negative 2. And I'm just going to pick a point. Actually, I see that the point 0, 0 lies on this graph, and that's a super easy point to use, so I'm all set when I need that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in my vertex form, or my vertex into my vertex form. So I have f of x equals a times a quantity of x, and in this case it's going to be minus 1 squared. I'm not a plus 2, I'm really plus a negative 2, so I'm just going to go minus 2. And now I can go ahead and plug in that coordinate point that I found of 0, 0. So 0 is going to go in for y equals a times 0 minus 1 squared minus 2. If I go and I try to get a by itself, I'll add 2 to both sides. So that gives me 2 equals 0 minus 1, is really a negative 1, but if I square it, that's going to give me a positive, so I really have a equals 2. So now, if I go and I write my equation, I really have f of x equals 2 times the quantity of x minus 1 squared minus 2. And this is the equation for the parabola that you see. A few things that I would just double check. I have a positive a value, which means my graph should be U-shaped. You can see that my graph is in fact U-shaped. My vertex, instead of being at 0, 0, should be down 2 units. It is in fact down 2 units, and I can see that because I have that negative 2 right there. So my points are at least on the right track for what I would anticipate. Example 3 says find the equation of the parabola in vertex form. Again, my vertex I'm going to find. So I can see here that my vertex is located at negative 2, positive 2. And I'll just list my point out right now. If I pick the point here, it looks like I'm at negative 1 and 0. My vertex form is f of x equals a times x minus h, the quantity squared, plus k. So I'm going to go ahead and plug everything in that I know so far. So f of x equals a times, now this is x minus, and it's really going to become x minus a negative 2 because here my x value is negative 2 squared. Well, if you remember, x minus a negative will become plus. So I have x plus, and I'll rewrite this down below. So I have the quantity of x plus 2, the quantity squared, and I still have to plug in that y value, so then it becomes plus 2 on the outside. So now that I have my formula written, I'm going to go ahead and take that point that I found of negative 1, 0 and plug it in. So 0 is my y equals a times a negative 1 for x plus 2, square that and add 2. So I really have 0 equals negative 1 plus 2 is going to give me 1. 1 squared is 1. So I really end up with a plus 2. Oops, and this here is a 0, not an a. If I subtract that 2 over, I really end up with a equals negative 2. So now when I go and I write my formula or my rule, I have f of x equals a negative 2 times the quantity of x plus 2 squared plus 2. Again, I'm just going to double check. My a value is a negative 2, which is exactly what it should be since my parabola is upside down. My vertex of that parabola is up 2 from 0, 0, which I can see that right there. So I would say that this is probably at least on the right track. Now, take a quick second and try to do this one on your own. Go ahead and hit pause, and I will work this one out, and you guys can go ahead and double check your answers. So real quick, I found that my vertex was at 2, negative 1, and I just picked the point for 0. So I have f of x equals a times the quantity of x minus 2 squared plus that negative 1, which is really going to make that minus 1. I'm going to plug in my point, which is 0 for y, a, I don't know, 4 is going to be x. I'm going to subtract 2, square it, subtract 1. So when I simplify, I have 0 equals 4 minus 2 is 2. If I square that, I'm really left with 4a minus 1. I add 1 to the other side, so I have 1 equals 4a, and I'm then going to find that a is really equal to 1/4. Well, looking at my graph, that does make sense because my graph does seem to be kind of wide. And remember, the closer that number is to 0, the wider your graph is. And it's positive, which means I should have a U-shaped graph. So again, I'm probably on the right track. So I have f of x equals 1/4 times the quantity of x minus 2 squared minus 1. And that is my final answer. Now for example 5, these are a little different because we're not given a graph, but we're given a table. So what we have to do is we have to find the vertex. So as I go down my graph, I notice that my points are getting smaller and smaller until I hit negative 4. Then once I hit negative 4, so these values are going down, Once I hit -4, now my numbers are actually starting to get bigger and bigger. So what that tells me then is that I have a vertex, okay, at -1, -4, okay? And I know that because that's my lowest point. So -1, -4 is my vertex, and I'm gonna do the exact same thing as I've done all along. Now in this case, I'm going to pick a point, and I can pick any one of these, but I see that 0, 1 is a really nice and easy point to use. So when I go and I do my equation, I have f of x equals a times x minus a -1 will give me x plus 1 squared minus 4. I'm going to go in and plug in my point that I've been given. So I have 1 equals a times 0 plus 1 squared minus 4. If I add that 4 over, I get 5 equals 1 squared is 1, so I really get 5 equals a. And my formula then is going to be f of x equals 5 times the quantity of x plus 1 squared minus 4. Now looking at this, because I know that this is a minimum for my vertex, and I can tell that because my numbers are getting smaller as I go from this direction, smaller as I go from this direction, I have a minimum, which tells me that I should have a U-shaped graph then, and that this a value should be positive, which is what I found. So again, I'm most likely on the right track. For example 6, I'm going to do the same thing. Because I'm given another table, I can see that my numbers here are getting bigger and bigger up until I hit 2, and then they start getting smaller and smaller again. So my vertex is going to be at the point 1, 2. I'm going to pick another point, and I really like to pick the points with 0. So I'm going to pick that point 0, -6 it looks like. And if I plug in my vertex first, I have f of x equals a times x minus 1 squared plus 2. Then I'm going to go ahead and plug in my coordinate point, which gives me -6 equals a times 0 minus 1 squared plus 2. If I add my 2 over, subtract my 2 over, I would get a -8 equals 0 minus 1 is a -1, but I'm squaring that, so I really have a equals -8, or f of x equals -8 times the quantity of x minus 1 squared plus 2. Well, again, I can assume that my a value should be negative because as I'm going from top to bottom, I see that my numbers are getting bigger and bigger. So that tells me that I am going to have a maximum, which means my parabola would be upside down, and that means I would have to have a negative a value. So again, probably on the right track. Please let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in class, and I hope you guys have a great day.